Imagine a late night in Washington. The tourists are gone, the monuments are lit against a black sky, and the heavy oak doors of the Capitol are closed. But inside the office buildings that ring the seat of American power, the lights are still burning. Staffers are hunched over phones that won't stop buzzing. A quiet, suffocating panic is spreading through the arteries of the Republican Party, and you need to understand the texture of this panic because it is fundamentally different from what we have seen before. Usually, when the GOP goes into crisis mode, it is because of an external threat, a relentless media cycle, a surge in Democratic polling, a scandal involving a donor, or a foreign policy disaster abroad. They know how to handle those. They have a playbook for those. You circle the wagons, you attack the messenger, you deflect, and you survive. But this is different. This crisis isn't coming from the New York Times or the Democratic National Committee or Beijing. It is coming from the call coming from inside the House. It is coming from their own president. What started as a headline that made the sophisticated elites of Europe and the coastal United States chuckle, the idea of purchasing Greenland, has metastasized. It has stopped being a joke and started becoming a ticking time bomb. What we are witnessing is the transformation of a whimsical obsession into a geopolitical sledgehammer that threatens to shatter the Republican coalition from the inside out. We are watching a political movement that prides itself on discipline and loyalty begin to eat itself alive. To truly grasp the magnitude of this, you have to look past the absurdity of the headline. Yes, the idea of the United States buying the world's largest island from the Kingdom of Denmark in the 21st century sounds like something from a game of Risk played by a child. It sounds laughable, but in the halls of Congress, nobody is laughing. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is reportedly unable to keep control of his conference. Lawmakers who have spent years defending the indefensible are finding themselves staring into an abyss they cannot spin their way out of. Allies in NATO are confused, oscillating between amusement and horror. And the most dangerous part, everyone in the room knows that if this obsession goes unchecked, if this transition from transactional real estate deal to coercive foreign policy completes itself, it won't just cost the Republicans the next election. It could end a presidency. It could trigger a constitutional rupture that permanently alters America's standing in the world. So, stay with me. We are going to peel back the layers of this story. We are going to look at the money, the ego, the military strategy, and the broken psychology of a party on the brink of a nervous breakdown. Because once you see what is really happening behind the scenes, you will understand why this story doesn't slow down. It only gets more explosive from here. The camera of history opens this scene not with a bang, but with a silence. It is the silence of a party realization. It is the silence of phone calls going unanswered because nobody knows what to say. Deep inside the Republican apparatus, a realization is setting in. The chaos agent they elected to burn down the establishment is now holding the match to their own political future. The threat isn't a bad poll number. The threat is a president dragging them toward a geopolitical cliff edge over a frozen landmass that most of their voters couldn't find on a map. He cannot stop talking about Greenland. And in those first few moments of realizing this isn't a passing fancy, you have to understand one thing clearly. This is not a story about foreign policy. Do not make the mistake of analyzing this through the lens of international relations or Arctic strategy. This is a story about power. It is a story about ego. It is a story about fear. It is a story about a political movement that has hollowed out its own immune system and is now defenseless against the whims of its leader. It starts, as so many disasters in the Trump era do, with something that sounds absurd enough to dismiss: cutting checks to Denmark, buying territory, ownership. It feels like a skit. It feels like a distraction. But while the late-night comedians are writing their jokes, Republicans in the House of Representatives, the people whose careers depend on the mood of the suburban voter, are staring at spreadsheets that look like autopsies. They are looking at district maps and internal polling data that are screaming a warning siren. They see that Donald Trump has placed them in the worst tactical position of the modern era. while they are desperately trying to survive the next election cycle by talking about inflation, about the border, about crime, the meat and potatoes issues that actually move votes, their leader is chasing a ghost. He is chasing an 18th century concept of empire in a 21st century world. He is driven by the instinct to conquer, to brand, to expand his name across a map in the same way he expands it across a hotel skyline. He desires the visual confirmation of his own greatness, and Greenland, massive, white, dominating the top of the globe, is the ultimate trophy. Behind closed doors, the lawmakers who once defended every tweet, who went on television to explain away every tantrum, are no longer laughing. They are terrified. They know something the base does not want to hear. They know that invading, coercing, or heavily pressuring a NATO ally like Denmark over a territorial purchase would not be a bold negotiation tactic. It would be a rupture. It would be the kind of event that shatters the post-World War II order. And for the first time in years, the word impeachment is being whispered in the dark corners of the Capitol, and it is not being whispered by Democrats. It is being whispered by Republicans. That is where this story truly begins. To understand why Greenland has become the spark for a MAGA civil war, you have to understand the psychology driving it. The policy case for buying Greenland collapses under the lightest scrutiny. Everyone in Washington knows this. The Heritage Foundation knows it. The Pentagon knows it. Even the sycophants on cable news know it, even as they pretend otherwise. Greenland is already an ally. It is already tied into NATO. We do not need to buy it to use it. The United States Air Force operates Thule Air Base, now Patuxent Space Base, which is the northernmost installation of the U.S. Armed Forces. It is a critical component of America's missile warning system. It monitors space. It watches Russia. We have had access to this strategic real estate for decades. Agreements are in place. Treaties are signed. Vice President J.D. Vance has visited the place. There is no national security gap that requires a deed of ownership to fix. There is no hostile power poised to seize nuke tomorrow morning. There is no strategic vacuum that demands American sovereignty instead of American cooperation. So, if it is not about strategy, what is it about? It is about obsession. Trump himself admitted it to the New York Times when he said, essentially, that ownership matters, that possession gives you something treaties cannot, that leases and agreements are for the weak and outright control is for the strong. In that moment, anyone who has studied Trump's career recognized the pattern. This isn't about defense. It is about dominance. It is the same instinct that drove him to put his name in gold letters on buildings he didn't even fully own. It is a fixation on size, on visibility, on permanence. Trump looks at a map, specifically the Mercator projection, which distorts the size of land masses near the poles, and he sees Greenland appearing to be the size of Africa. He sees a massive white canvas waiting for his signature. Geographers can explain for hours why that projection is wrong, but Trump doesn't live in the world of academic geography. He lives in a visual, instinctive, gut-driven universe where big equals powerful and ownership equals legacy. The tragedy for the Republican Party is that this instinct, which might be merely ridiculous if he were still just a Manhattan developer, becomes catastrophic when translated into the delicate machinery of global politics. Inside the House of Representatives, that catastrophe is no longer theoretical. Republicans are furious. They are furious because of the timing. They are furious because of the optics. They are furious because of the cost. Think about the platform Trump ran on. He ran on affordability. He ran on lowering prices for the forgotten man. He ran on the idea that the elites were spending money on foreign adventures while Americans couldn't afford bacon and gas. And now, instead of focusing on housing or healthcare or the price of milk, he is floating the idea of spending astronomical sums, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars per Greenlander, to acquire a territory that delivers zero immediate benefit to the voter in Ohio or Pennsylvania who is struggling to pay their mortgage. For a Republican in a swing district, someone like Don Bacon of Nebraska, this is political poison. They know exactly how the Democratic attack ads will be written. While your rent went up, Donald Trump wanted to buy an island. While you couldn't afford your insulin, the GOP was trying to buy Greenland. It paints the party as detached, unserious, and profligate. And here is the part that terrifies them most. There is no clean way to defend it. There is no simple talking point. You can't wrap buying a NATO ally's territory against their will in the American flag. You can't sell it as toughness. It comes across as delusional. And you certainly cannot explain to a suburban mother in Atlanta why this matters more than the quality of her children's schools. That fear has turned into something dangerous for Trump, Republican defiance. This brings us to Don Bacon. You need to know who Don Bacon is. He is not a firebrand. He is not a social media provocateur like Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene. He is a congressman from Nebraska's 2nd District, a seat that Joe Biden won. He is a former Air Force brigadier general. He is a national security conservative. He is the kind of man whose warnings carry weight because he does not issue them lightly. He represents the institutional memory of the Republican Party, the part of the party that believes in alliances, in strategy, in the military chain of command. When Don Bacon publicly called Trump's Greenland fixation utter buffoonery, it was a signal. But when he went further and warned that following through on it, specifically using coercion or force, could spark bipartisan impeachment efforts, it sent a shockwave through Capitol Hill. This wasn't an anonymous source leaking to Politico. This was a sitting Republican member of Congress saying out loud what many others were only whispering in the cloakroom. Bacon went on to say that invading an ally would be catastrophic. He said it would be the end of Trump's presidency. He said Republicans would not tolerate it. Those words matter. They signal a fracture in the party that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is increasingly powerless to heal. Mike Johnson's problem is simple and brutal. He doesn't actually command the House. His majority is razor thin. His caucus is deeply divided between the institutionalists who want to govern and the disruption agents who want to burn it down. The procedural tools that speakers have used for a century to bury uncomfortable votes are failing him. The discharge petition, a parliamentary maneuver that allows a majority of members to force a vote on a bill even if the speaker opposes it, is becoming a weapon. Discharge petitions are forcing legislation onto the floor that Johnson never wanted to see the light of day, and every one of those votes puts Republicans on the record. Johnson fears individual votes more than massive omnibus bills. When you vote on a 2,000-page spending package, you can hide. You can say, I didn't like the waste, but I had to support the troops. You can claim ignorance of the details. But when a single issue stands alone, a vote on war powers, a vote on restricting the president's ability to attack an ally, there is nowhere to hide. Every yes or no is a campaign weapon. Democrats know this. They are happy to stand back and let Republicans tear themselves apart in public. The Greenland issue amplifies this dysfunction because it intersects with the most volatile rail in American politics, war powers. When Republicans in the Senate, the cooling saucer of the legislative branch, start voting to restrict a Republican president's ability to unilaterally use military force, you know the situation has crossed a red line. These are lawmakers who have spent decades expanding executive power. They have spent careers arguing that the president needs maximum flexibility to protect the homeland. Yet now they are signaling that Trump's instincts cannot be trusted. They are signaling that his impulsiveness poses a tangible risk of dragging the country into a conflict with an ally for no coherent reason. This is an extraordinary rebuke. It raises a question that cuts to the core of this entire saga. If members of the president's own party believe he must be restrained by law to prevent disaster, what does that say about the state of American leadership? The answer, increasingly, is that leadership has fractured into survival instinct. Lawmakers are no longer thinking in terms of long-term strategy or ideological purity. They are thinking about the next headline, the next primary challenge, the next general election. Don Bacon is retiring. That gives him the freedom of the damned. He has nothing left to lose. When someone like Bacon hints that he could caucus with Democrats to enable an impeachment if Trump crosses a line, it isn't because he wants to switch parties. It's because he understands leverage. In a House this divided, one or two defections change the entire math of power. The mere possibility of that defection is enough to destabilize the entire structure. All of this is happening against the backdrop of Trump's broader foreign policy, which has already alarmed allies and emboldened adversaries. His approach to Ukraine, his willingness to echo Russian talking points, his transactional view of NATO, these have convinced many Republicans that the traditional post-World War II order is under threat from the Oval Office itself. Greenland becomes a symbol in this context. It is not about the island. It is about a president who sees the world not as a network of relationships to manage, but as a collection of assets to acquire. That worldview thrills a segment of the base that equates aggression with strength, but it terrifies policymakers who understand how fragile global stability actually is. Once impeachment enters the conversation, even hypothetically, the incentives change. Every misstep is magnified. Every reckless statement becomes evidence. Every internal disagreement becomes a crack that opponents can widen. Trump famously does not respond well to being told no. The more resistance he encounters, the more he doubles down. He frames opposition as betrayal. That dynamic guarantees escalation. Backing off would require acknowledging limits, and acknowledging limits has never been Donald Trump's strength. Republicans who hope he will quietly abandon the Greenland idea are underestimating how deeply it has become tied to his sense of self. This is why the early stages of this story matter so much. We are capturing the moment when farce hardens into crisis, when jokes about maps give way to discussions about war. The MAGA movement was built on loyalty to a person, not an institution. That loyalty is now being tested by the consequences of that person's choices. For years, Republicans justified the chaos as the price of winning. But now the bill is coming due. It is arriving in the form of a frozen island, a speaker who cannot control his chamber, and a president whose instincts may finally be too much for his own party to tolerate. As we move deeper into this crisis, the question is no longer whether this obsession will cause damage. The question is how much damage it will cause and whether the people who enabled it are prepared to stop it before it consumes everything in its path. The tension doesn't ease after the first cracks appear. It thickens. Once a party realizes its leader is no longer controllable, every interaction becomes a calculation. Every silence is a signal. Every public defense is a performance layered over private panic. And that is exactly where Washington finds itself. Greenland is morphing from an embarrassing distraction into a full-blown stress test of the Republican Party's remaining coherence. Behind closed doors, the conversations are no longer about whether Trump is serious. Everyone knows seriousness isn't the point. The point is impulse. The point is the way he latches onto an idea and refuses to let go, feeding on resistance as proof of his own relevance. For lawmakers exhausted by years of crisis management, this feels different, heavier. The House floor becomes a battlefield of procedure. Leadership scrambles to cancel votes they cannot win. Members admit they don't know their own vote counts. The Speaker's gavel feels increasingly symbolic. Power in this moment doesn't flow from titles. It flows from leverage, and leverage belongs to anyone willing to defy the system without fear of consequences. Figures like Don Bacon loom large, not because they have massive followings, but because they represent a category of Republican that Trumpism never fully accounted for, the institutional conservative who values hierarchy and predictability, and who sees the Greenland fixation as recklessness masquerading as strength. What makes this moment volatile is that it collides with a deeper truth many Republicans have denied for years. Trump's worldview does not distinguish between domestic politics and foreign policy. Everything is transactional. Everything is personal. Everything is reactive. When that mindset meets the machinery of the American state, the results are unpredictable at best and disastrous at worst. The Greenland episode exposes this collision. There is no constituency clamoring for this purchase, no expert community endorsing it, no clear objective beyond the ego of ownership. Yet the president continues to float it, forcing allies to respond, markets to speculate, and adversaries to watch. NATO partners read these signals as instability. They wonder if the U.S. still understands that cooperation is not weakness. Inside the Pentagon and State Department, Professionals are left to quietly plan for contingencies they never expected. When a president talks about not taking no for an answer regarding a sovereign ally's territory, it changes threat assessments. It changes escalation ladders. Diplomats find themselves issuing reassurances they cannot fully substantiate. Allies listen politely and prepare independently. They know that in Washington, political volatility often precedes sudden, unilateral decisions. Trump's obsession erodes trust through anticipation. The mere possibility of erratic behavior forces everyone to hedge. Back on Capitol Hill, the procedural chaos intensifies. Votes are delayed, pulled, rescheduled. Every cancellation is a story. It reveals that control has slipped. Uncertainty breeds paranoia. Factions form around survival strategies, not ideology. Some cling tighter to Trump, others look for escape routes. This fragmentation turns the House into a marketplace of leverage. A handful of independent-minded conservatives wield outsized influence simply by being unpredictable. And where the Speaker's authority erodes, the space for compromise shrinks. Backing down requires admitting error, and admitting error punctures the myth of infallibility. The MAGA civil
पढ़ पढ़ इल्म किताबां सब्बे ते तू नाम रखा लिया काजी फड़ तलवार दिलावर बनियो ते तू नाम रखा लिया गाजी मक्के जाके हज गुजारे ते तू नाम रखा लिया हाजी ओ बुल्ले शाह अजे कख नहीं खटिया ओ जे तू यार नी कीता राजी की करना भरोसा झूठे यार दा की करना भरोसा झूठे यार दा मैनू दगा दिता पहला फिर पुकारदा की करना यारां दे झूठे प्यार दा की करना यारां दे झूठे प्यार दा जे मैं कल्ला कल्ला बैठे रात गुजारदा की करना यारां दे झूठे प्यार दा की करना मर्ज मैनू तेरा होवे दवा तेरे नाल वे दर्द मिट जांदा जे तू पूछे मेरा हाल वे ओ मर्ज मैनू तेरा होवे दवा तेरे नाल वे दर्द मिट जांदा जे तू पूछे मेरा हाल वे इश्क दा मैं मिर्जा होया तेरा ही कमाल वे फिक्र तेरी मिर्जे नू बस तेरा ही ख्याल वे दगा दिता पहला फिर पुकारदा की करना भरोसा झूठे यार दा की करना भरोसा झूठे यार दा मैनू दगा दिता पहला फिर पुकारदा की करना की करना